Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. The division championship Minnesota Twins are looking to go all the way to the World Series in 2024. Bolstered by inspirational shortstop Carlos Correa, a healthy Brian Buxton, and rookie phenom Royce Lewis, plus a pitching staff led by Pablo Lopez and an outstanding bullpen featuring Johan Duran, the Twins are the best bargain in the major leagues, and Target Field is the best venue in baseball. Sheridan Dulas & Kins, PA, a family and criminal defense law firm, has been serving clients in Dakota County and throughout Minnesota for over 40 years. Ranked a Tier 1 Best Law Firm by U.S. News and World Report every year since 2009, Sheridan Dulas & Kins are here to help you in your most difficult life circumstances. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Spirits was among the first 50 micro-distilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at our facility. If you're interested in visiting and learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check our website and plan a visit to tour our facility and taste our spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Access to Democracy. I'm your host, Steve Francisco. It's a pleasure to welcome back to our studio today our good friend. He's been on the show before, Professor Richard Logan. Welcome back to Access to Democracy, Richard.
It's always a pleasure to be here. I love coming here to be interviewed and to be an interviewer. I've done that a few times. Oh, sorry about
a little message.
I tried to turn my phone off.
There you go.
I'm sorry about that.
Tell our viewers, you have brought some artwork with you today, and let's get to that first. What do we have here?
Well, these are two different wood carvings by Makonde wood carvers from Tanzania. This one dates back to the 1970s, and this one the 1990s. But they play on the same theme. And I think I said on a previous visit here that this kind of art influenced Picasso a great deal, especially if you look at the one over there. Yeah.
You can see the influence there.
Right.
And in case our viewers haven't surmised already, today we are going to be talking about Africa.
Yes.
And particularly two things: your extensive experience living and working in Africa, and what you did there and what you learned from your time in Africa. And I'm also going to be working in some observations from my trip. My wife and I just returned from a 3-week visit we hit 4 countries in 3 weeks. We were in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Namibia, and a tremendously interesting trip. So thank you for joining us today and welcome back. So when did you go to Africa the first time, and what brought you there? What were you doing there?
The first time was way back in 1970. I was a very green new doctorate in anthropology, actually human development, which is a little more interdisciplinary than just anthropology. And I had an opportunity, I was selected through an interview process and so on, to go be a visiting lecturer at the University of Nairobi in the social sciences. So I taught a lot of different classes. To be perfectly honest, over 2 years teaching there, I learned far more from my students than they ever learned from me. And I learned things of lifelong value from my time doing field work, and I did have an opportunity to do some in village Africa. Mostly the agrarian, agricultural Kikuyu people, the largest tribe in Kenya, and the pastoral, nomadic, warrior Maasai people. And I had many, many very meaningful experiences. My wife came along too. She was a research assistant on the same project I was attached to.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
You were in Africa, I should say, at a time of tremendous social and political change.
Absolutely.
We had come out of a very long period, a couple of hundred years of colonial rule,
Right.
where European countries such as the United Kingdom, France, Belgium in the Congo, Portugal, other countries from Europe had colonies in Africa. I even learned that on our trip, we visited a place called Swakopmund in Namibia, which is on the Atlantic Ocean shore, and discovered that this area used to be called Southwest Africa, was
Right.
actually formerly a German colony in southern Africa. Give us your impression of what the legacy is of colonialism in Africa and what types of changes you saw occurring in society when you were there.
Well, we got there in 1970. Kenya only became fully independent in 1964. So they still had, like when I went to teach at the University of Nairobi, I was hardly the only white person there. There were a lot of British professors, Dutch, and so on. So there was that factor. I think another huge legacy is that most of the boundaries of the sub-Saharan African nations, actually in North Africa as well to some degree, were drawn by the colonial powers and not chosen by the people themselves. So there were a lot of issues of identity, because there were members of the Luo tribe, a very large tribe in western Kenya, but they also lived in eastern Uganda. So a lot of these boundaries didn't really make sense in terms of the people who actually lived within them. Plus, the government was imposed from afar and from above on them, and very few Africans had much experience in leadership at the national level. And so plus another thing, there was competition for national power. The two largest tribes in Kenya, the Luo in the west and the Kikuyu in the central areas, they competed for national power with each other. So you had the problem of tribalism as another part of the legacy of colonialism.
And one of the reasons that the European countries went there to assert their national power, I forgot to mention Holland, the Dutch,
yes.
who were very prominent in South Africa, where I was.
That's right.
The legacy of the Afrikaners in that part of Africa.
That's right.
Much of the impetus for them to go to these places was to extract natural resources, wasn't it?
Gold, diamonds, absolutely right. And of course, one of the lasting problems is that to this day, Africans do not have significant control over their own natural resources, or their agricultural production, or various other things as well.
And now we're seeing stories in the news, to bring it forward to the current day, our day, stories about China and the United States competing to get into Africa to extract rare earth minerals,
right.
which are very valuable in things like computers and cellular telephones and things such as this. And what are your thoughts about this presence of, is it sort of a new form of colonialism, or is it actually a business opportunity for the African countries, or is it a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I think China is taking tremendous advantage, and what they're doing is very smart. They are investing a great deal. Like, they built this modern railway from Mombasa on the east, the Indian Ocean on the east coast of Kenya, all the way through Kenya up to Nairobi, and it's more modern than a lot of trains in the United States or in Europe, and that's but that's very smart on their part. Now the Russians, on the other hand, they're creating tremendous mischief, with putting the Wagner Group paramilitary forces into different parts of
where there are conflicts in Africa.
Right, siding with one
countries.
side, trying to end up having a big piece of national power in the end, and so on. And the United States, especially with the withdrawal of the of so many seasoned USAID workers, embassy officials who are civil servants with long careers who really know the cultures of those countries. We are stepping far back from being a good neighbor to the people of Africa.
Let's dig a little deeper into that topic, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Richard. We've read in the news about the Trump administration dismantling the U.S. Agency for International Development. Now, this was an agency that I believe was created during the Kennedy administration in the early 1960s, and it's sort of complementary to other efforts that we had that developed in the 62, such as Peace Corps.
The Peace Corps, yes.
That sent young Americans to these developing countries in Africa and elsewhere in Asia and Latin America to do good work, to help build irrigation systems, to help build schools, medical clinics, etc. Isn't this really abdicating American soft power when we move to abolish groups like USAID?
You said...
And let's say soft power is the opposite of military power, weapons and military arsenals that we may sell to a country, but soft power is something quite different, isn't it? Isn't it valuable?
Soft power is, well, I think I just used the term being a good neighbor, but soft power is also a way of being a responsible global citizen and winning friends rather than bullying people. And the fact that, say, the Kennedy airlift back in the 1960s allowed so many Africans to come and get university educations in the United States, and many of them went on to become leaders.
Back in their own countries.
Back in their own countries, yeah. So in the Voice of America had a lot of, we used to listen to the Voice of America. It was a little bit propagandistic about America, but in a very, very, in my view, understated way. And so you could listen to great programs on American jazz and African Americans talking about their search for the roots in Africa and various things like that. So it has a lot to do with creating a good image for a country. And we came in at a time, it was really quite striking to see how many Kenyans who didn't think all that kindly of the Brits, the British, who had been their colonizers for a century, thinking so positively about the United States. That was impressive and moving. There was a little bit of a downside because it was during the Vietnam War, and the Vietnam War was not popular. But that was there was also that going on as well.
It's interesting you mention that, because when my wife and I were just in Africa, we talked to people there too, of course. And one of the things they were pointing out to us, relating again to this issue of competition for influence in the world, we flew into a brand new sparkling airport in Victoria Falls, and there's a plaque right outside the airport that says, "Built by the People's Republic of China."
Oh, yes.
And the airport in Windhoek, which is the capital city of Namibia, also in southern Africa, that airport was also built by the Chinese. So they have made these huge investments in infrastructure there. And what we were told was, yes, they were employing local people in addition to bringing in engineers from China who were working on those projects. But we didn't hear anything about American initiatives. In fact, we heard just the opposite about Americans pulling out USAID workers and this type of thing. So it sort of goes to your point.
Yeah. Now, early on, our investment, there was American investment in private enterprises in Africa, in business, and also in agriculture, but not so much in the heavily engineered kind of infrastructure you're seeing with China. They're building a highway all the way across Tanzania into Central Africa, and it's going through game reserves and so on. And of course, that's another way to get to an endpoint where there are the mines for the rare earths in Central Africa.
I had the impression when we were in Africa recently that the word that just kept popping in my mind after seeing all that we did was the word potential. There is so much potential. And I think for a lot of people, they may not realize just how big Africa is. That I believe I looked up the figure, I think it was 54 countries of the world in one continent
Right.
in Africa. And I
Right.
didn't look up the population, I should have, but it's a vast
It's a
population.
billion.
And
It's in in the realm of a billion.
you probably knew this, but I don't know if many of our viewers know this. One of the fastest growing countries in the world right now is Nigeria.
Yes.
And that Lagos, the capital of Nigeria, is predicted within the next 10, 20 years will become the biggest city in the world, because you have people moving from rural areas into the urban center looking for a higher standard of living,
Yes.
looking for job opportunities.
Right.
They're talking about potentially a city of over 20 million people within a few years.
Yeah, and this influx of people from rural areas into urban areas is a mixed bag, right? I mean, people go
It's
there.
been going on a while,
It's
too.
been,
Yeah.
well, actually, that's interesting because there's more of an urban tradition in West Africa before colonialism than there was in East Africa. And that reminds me of another point. Different colonial powers exercised their power in the African countries in different ways. The French tried to make the citizens of all of the colonies, in the French African colonies, into Frenchmen.
Right.
The Brits left local government pretty much alone. The Portuguese really intermingled with the African cultural people much more than others did. The Belgians were the most brutal.
They were in the
Congo. The Belgians
Central
were
Africa. Yeah.
Inhumanely brutal. They would punish a worker if a worker was homesick from work by cutting off his child's hand. I mean, they would do things like that. They were absolutely brutal. But it's also, there's a little bit of another issue is the only example a lot of African people had of how to be a national leader was the example, say, of the British governor in Kenya wearing a blue pinstripe suit. And so some of these things carried on into the cultures of the new generation of African leaders. And of course, the new generation of African leaders that began to emerge in the 1960s and so on, they had different styles.
Right. People like Jomo Kenyatta.
Yes.
Was King Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, was he still on the scene at that point?
Yes,
he was getting older then.
Yes, he was. I think I actually met Jomo Kenyatta a few times. He happened to be the chancellor of the University of Nairobi. There was an amusing situation where my wife and I were at the Agricultural Society of Kenya show. It goes on every year in this great park on the outskirts of Nairobi. And Jomo Kenyatta comes marching down this aisle on the grass between throngs of hundreds, probably thousands of people. And everybody's kind of in awe except for one person. And that was my wife, Carol, who had a big, broad smile on her face. And so Kenyatta walked up to her and said, "Jambo, habari," in Swahili. And Carol knew a little Swahili, and she spoke back. And that was a memorable moment.
What a tremendous experience.
But then one of the most humanitarian of this new generation of leaders was the president of Tanzania, whose name is escaping me right now. He did not see. Kenyatta was a Kikuyu, and of course he was in competition. He was in competition with the Luo. For a very short period, they had a Luo vice president. So the president and vice president each came from the largest tribes. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of the president.
Nyerere?
Nyerere. Julius Nyerere.
Nyerere.
We heard about him. They called him Walimu.
Right.
Walimu is Swahili for teacher. It's also Arabic for teacher.
Yeah.
He was a humane leader, and Tanzania, part of the legacy of Tanzania over the years was they were among the least tribalistic of a lot of the African countries post-independence. Yeah.
You have said that, you've told me, and I think you've probably written this too, that one of your heroes is Nelson Mandela, who the South Africans affectionately refer to this day as Madiba. Madiba. And Bonnie and I, my wife and I, had the privilege of visiting his home where he lived in Soweto.
Yes.
And an interesting little fact here that we toured Nelson Mandela's home, and they had, of course, lots of photographs of his life. One of the most vociferous opponents of apartheid, led South Africa to majority black rule. Right down the street, literally 2 blocks away, is the home of the late Bishop Desmond Tutu, Anglican bishop in South Africa. And of course, he was instrumental in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that helped South Africa make this transition from apartheid rule to majority rule in South Africa. But tell us why Mandela is one of your heroes.
Oh, it's a long story. He was a political activist early on in going back into the 1960s and even before.
Founded the ANC,
the African National Congress,
right.
which was, and apartheid was put in place by the Dutch or the Afrikaner government in 1948. Mandela was imprisoned by them in 1962, I think. He was a trained attorney. He was a learned man. He and his fellow prisoners on Robben Island, which is an island off the coast near Cape Town, they looked back at their time there and they called it Robben University, because they all read the great literature of the world. They read the great political and social philosophers. And one of the most, you asked me why I admire him so much. I mean, he's beloved because even though he was treated so brutally and so cruelly, he came out of 27 years in prison as one of the world's great humanitarians. And you mentioned Truth and Reconciliation. Yes, they engaged in this extraordinary act of forgiving the people who had treated them so brutally.
Well, people who had committed murder, committed human rights violations and atrocities in the name of the apartheid system. And it just hit me when we were there touring this home and learning more about Bishop Tutu as well. South Africa could have taken a very radically different course in its history, that they could have been on the verge of all-out racial war, which would have been horrific. Civil wars are always horrific.
Right.
But they were really at the precipice, and fortunately for them, they had people like Nelson Mandela and Bishop Tutu at the forefront of leadership and showed them there was a different way that they could go on and build a country.
One of Bishop Tutu's great friends was the Dalai Lama. And Desmond Tutu was also one of the most articulate spokespersons for Ubuntu, which is a Bantu word meaning we only are here because of each other. I am because you are because I am. And it's an abiding philosophy among a lot of people. Sadly, when Desmond Tutu died only a few years ago, he was the last of what you might call South Africa's greatest generation, including Mandela.
Right.
Mandela, there's so many stories where, if you saw the movie Invictus, if you saw that movie,
that was the one about the football team with the white players.
The rugby team.
Or rugby team representing South Africa.
And he won, and the rugby had been an entirely Afrikaner sport and cultural thing. And at rugby matches, the white people, say if it's South Africa versus England, the white people would be rooting for the the Springboks, the South African team,
Right.
but the blacks would be rooting for England. And Mandela said that, and we've got to change that. And so he personally persuaded, the rugby players to do it for South Africa and not just for the Afrikaners. And he did many other things, like his head of security, the man who became his head of security, got into that role. This is after Mandela became president, became the head of security for Mandela, had previously been a senior officer in the South African Special Police Unit that enforced apartheid.
Right.
And there are many wonderful interviews with some of these white figures who talk in very moving terms about how getting to know Nelson Mandela turned them around.
Isn't that something?
He was a generous person. He was a generous human being.
And I have to tell folks, if you ever have a chance to visit Cape Town,
Yes.
don't miss it.
Oh.
Here's a city that is just one of the most stunning cities geographically. Table Mountain, right next to the Atlantic Ocean.
Right.
Beautiful place.
Yeah.
But it's a mixed bag. There is a lot of poverty there. There is a lot of crime in certain areas.
That's right.
And you sort of have this legacy that continues from the apartheid era. We heard about this while we were on our visit to South Africa. We've heard more recently claims by the US President Donald Trump claiming that there is a genocide going on against white farmers. We were just there. We did not hear that or see that. But what we did hear about was they do have a crime problem. And they've had a persistent crime problem for many years. And the South African president, when he visited the White House, told Mr. Trump that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if that was fully heard or fully understood, but let's see. About 8% of the population of South Africa is white. Mm-hmm. I think about 2% of the victims, homicide victims, are white.
Right.
It's roughly in that ballpark. And the rate of homicides overall, the United States has a pretty bad reputation, a bad record. But South Africa per capita has a rate a few times, three or four times greater than the United States.
So they have some problems and challenges they're facing, but again, back to that word that I kept thinking of, potential. And we saw this not just in South Africa, but in Zimbabwe and in Namibia too. These are tremendous places that if our viewers ever have a chance to visit them, they really shouldn't miss them. And the people we met, you could not have met nicer, friendlier people who were so proud of their culture and their heritage and their language. Tremendous.
You know, one of the lessons I learned for our years in Kenya was the most generous people in the world are poor people.
Yeah.
The strongest people in the world are women of color who live in poverty, indigenous women who live in poverty. And I will say this too, I mean, the time I spent in village Africa, first of all, to disabuse people this notion that Africa is a violent place. Traditional village Africa was and is not a violent place.
Richard, unfortunately, as always happens, the clock is working against us today. We will have you on again to continue the discussion. Professor Richard Logan, thank you for joining us today on Access to Democracy, once again sharing your observations about Africa.
And you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.